Hey, thanks for being here. And I wanted to start off with the economy. And right now, we see the economy with the corporate media, with the government. They're putting out numbers and they're telling us that the economy is doing well. But then we see Toys R Us, they closed. We see other major retailers have closed. We see real estate in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, in the United States, prices have leveled off. They're coming down now. We see interest rates moving up. And, from everything that is happening here, what is your take on the economy? Why do we see so many strange things happening right now?
I think it's complete dysfunction. And one of the things that we're seeing that's odd to people is that the recession never ended in 2009. So a lot of people say this is an old bull market, or it's a longest running booming economy, quote unquote, in history. But really, we were in a severe recession going into as late as 2 or 3 years ago. We were still into a severe recession. Now, the numbers all say we're not in recession. The unemployment rate, which is completely garbage, had been going down for 8-9 years straight since the financial panic. So what happened is now you actually have some fundamental things. Some things that actually did help the economy, like the rolling back of regulations and the tax cuts. And when they started to help the economy, it's like, what do we do now? We've already faked the unemployment rate down to 4%. Where the hell do you go with it now? And so now you actually, instead of having these massive amounts of part-time jobs, or let's say 10 million people added onto the food stamp program, you've got 3.5 people dropping off of the food stamp roll. So there are some fundamental things that are improving, but you're in a totally dysfunctional environment. The entire since the 2008 crisis, there have been so many unprecedented things done by the central banks and central planners with negative interest rates, quantitative easing. So you've had this economy and this bull market that's been completely built on air. And now you actually have some fundamental things that are good for the United States and good for the world. But now where the hell do you go with it from here? Because you've already faked it so far. So I think the next thing is we're finally going to see the inflation, the price inflation that many of us have seen coming for a long time. Because, as we faked it and band-aided over this severe crisis, the debt everything got worse. Fundamentally, the deficit got worse. The public debt is bad. It went from almost being able to be reset to where now it's worse than ever. Same thing for the mortgages. The housing prices the bubble's been reinflated. And now we've created this everything bubble where all the assets, the commodities stocks suck, but the commodities themselves, lumber at an all-time high. Oil's oil's high. Many of the other industrial metals are doing well. So you have a very dysfunctional environment. So it's a tricky question when you say, how's the economy? Well, in some aspects of it, the economy is doing much better than it was 3 to 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But the problem is we had a huge problem in 2008, and then we took that problem and swallowed it with currency creation and debt. And so now we have a problem that's 10 times as big as 2008. So where do we go from here? And I think between the tariffs, the tax cuts, and a little bit of a move here in the economy, I think inevitably we are going to finally see some inflation as people define it in their heads, that the price is going up. Obviously, we've seen a ton of inflation as far as expansion of the currency supply, but we'll see the price inflation now, and I think that's coming within 6 months. If not, it's already started.
So when you say inflation, are you talking about like what the Fed is talking about, like we're going to get up to 2% inflation, or are you talking something completely different?
No, I'd say something completely different. The Fed's numbers, again, they've been so manipulated, whether it's unemployment or GDP. It's very tricky for them to even figure it out themselves what it really is. John Williams from Shadow Stats, he's done a good job in using the same methodologies as the 1990s, and he's got another one that goes back to what they used in the 1980s. And that'll help us get a better picture of where the price inflation is. Like for unemployment, for example, I like to use shadowstats.com or Gallup. Look, we trust Gallup to poll a presidential election with 100 million votes. They're off by 2 points, maybe. I kind of trust their unemployment numbers more than the government, who is surveying also. A lot of people don't know that. The actual rate is like a survey. It's like a poll. So, but when it comes to inflation, I think we're going to, see that, 7 to 10, 12% price inflation. And we're already there in many things. People just don't realize it because there is a lot of shadow inflation that's been going on for the past decade. And, I know there's a couple websites that have done articles about this in the past. And maybe it's a good idea. Maybe I should write one. But, where you've got your ice creams are in the same, whatever, I'm trying to think, container, but maybe it's a few ounces less. So you're buying less ice cream, but you're paying the same price. Well, it doesn't look inflationary, but that is inflation. That's shadow inflation. So I think we are going to see that price inflation, and we'll see what happens with the U.S. dollar. That's the ultimate inflation. That could become a hyperinflationary event. But for now, I don't see that in the near future, just because the entire global economy is tied into the U.S. dollar. And for something to happen to the U.S. dollar, that means China's in a lot of pain, Russia's in a lot of pain, Europe's in a lot of pain. So I don't think everybody is upset enough with the U.S. or wants to take down the U.S. enough to actually do something to where they'd hurt themselves. Because if the U.S. dollar crashes, you're talking about a systemic global event that will be a disaster for everybody in power.
I mean, you mentioned the dollar and you mentioned China and Russia, but in the past, couple of years, and actually in the last couple of months, Russia, they've been, selling their treasuries, moving away from the dollar, creating their own payment system. We have China doing the same thing. They have their own payment system. They have their own, gold exchange, Shanghai Gold Exchange, and their own payment system, like I said. Now, it looks like those countries and other countries, India and many others, they're kind of like slowly moving away from the dollar. Are they preparing for when this dollar collapses? Is that why they're moving away?
I think that's a great observation, because they are doing that, but it does take a long time. So in our minds as individuals, we see the writing on the wall. And if you're like me, I confused inevitability with imminent. But in reality, it's going to take some time. What we're talking about here is very significant, very large. This will be a marker in history. The world in 1971 went to a fiat-only standard. The first time in history, the money was literally backed by nothing. And now here we are today, fast forward 40 years later, and this will end, but it might not end tomorrow. It might take 10, 15, even 20 years to play out. And I know it sounds like crazy talk to say this can go on for another 20 years. But if you guys are, like me, and you were following this in 2007, 2008, think about it. We're 10 years away from Lehman Brothers. Who would have thought the Dow would be at 25, 26,000? We would have gone without a major crisis since Lehman Brothers. I would have thought there would have been some sort of significant crisis. So I often tell my future money trends readers, it's very likely we'll see Dow 50,000 before we see Dow 5,000 or even Dow 15,000. Because if you consider the people in power, they have to keep this going. So what will they do to stay in power? They'll do anything, whether it's a Fed or a Chinese politician. They do not want this to spin out of control on them. So when you think about like the pension system or the entire financial system, it's dependent on the financial assets going up. It's dependent on the dollar. So what is the most likely event? If everybody in power needs the same thing and is dependent on the same thing, okay, well, look, I already tried to bet against the Fed in 2000, and that didn't work out for me. I had accurately forecasted the crash of the stock market and the collapse of Lehman Brothers. But I lost a lot of money because I had purchased a ton of silver, and the silver went from 21 to $9. So I'm a big believer in real diversification now. But so I do own some stocks, but I don't own them because I'm thinking, I'm going to get my 7% or 12% a year like Dave Ramsey predicts. I own them because I'm like, you know what? If the Fed and every pension system and every politician on the planet wants these things to go up, then hell, why not? Let's see what happens. The worst that can happen is I end up stuck owning a piece of a business like McDonald's or Chevron. So ultimately, I'd rather own a piece of a business than a fiat currency. So I am very concerned that there's going to be a systemic crisis. I just think realistically, it's going to take a long time to play out.
I just want to stay on the stock market. I mean, the S&P 500 right now, we've seen, 10 years of positive returns, and before that it was, 9. And we're seeing, mixed messages. And we talked about this just before, where the Fed, where they reported the economy is strong. But then we have like Warren Buffett out there saying that the stock market metric suggests serious pain awaits investors. So at one end, we have the Fed saying, no, the economy's fine, everything looks great. Then we have Warren Buffett and some other financial pundits out there saying that we're going to feel pain very soon. Which message here is the right message?
Well, I think both in a way. And I actually have an in-depth article about this going out on futuremoneytrends.com. So about the time people are listening to this, it's probably going to be posted on the website, or you'll get an email about it. But, look, the S&P 500, or the stock market in general, is up for 9 to 10 years now. However, we also need to consider it's only up nominally. Does it have a real gain against inflation? And I would argue that it's not much, if any, against actual real price inflation adjusted to what John Williams keeps track of at shadowstats.com, or even the government's numbers when you actually use the one that doesn't strip out energy and the cost of food. So is the stock market really up? The perception is it's up, but nominally up it's just like wages. Wages aren't up. Nominally they're up, but they're not up adjusted to inflation. So I think that's one thing people need to consider, that when they think about, can the Dow Jones or the S&P 500 go another 5 years or 10 years? I say absolutely yes. And that's because it hasn't truly gone up in a significant way to actually outpace inflation. So, but what Warren Buffett's showing, when he uses different metrics, which, look, the guy doesn't really time the markets, and he hasn't been the S&P 500 in the past 10 years, which is by his own definition how you judge a hedge fund manager. But so both are right. But at the same point in time, we always have to keep in mind, if there's deflation, or if there is a stock market crash, this could implode state budgets. This could implode pension funds. This could implode the financial system to the point where people in power lose power. So now, I tend to be on the side that believes that there is no option of deflation. They will choose inflation. Deflation is the natural force. That's what should happen. That's what needs to happen to clear all the debt out, to clear all the misallocation of money and capital out. But I don't think that can happen, because I don't think everybody in power is on the same side of this trade. So I think what's more than likely to happen is that before you see any kind of crash, I think you're going to see the S&P 500 and the Dow go to higher levels than any of us can possibly imagine.
Now, is the S&P 500 and the Dow, are they moving up organically, or is this a manipulation of the market?
I think it's manipulation. It's not only manipulation with the buybacks, but it's manipulation with actual openly manipulated, where it's not even hidden anymore. It used to be that we would make an allegation as a conspiracy, theorist or somebody would say that the central banks are buying stocks. Now they just disclose it on the SEC forms, the 13K. So you literally have one of the biggest buyers of the stock market has been, the Swiss National Bank and the Norwegian National Bank. Their top holdings are Facebook, Google. I mean, these FANG stocks that everybody talks about. So let's be real. If you're printing money at no cost and then turning around and buying shares of Google and Facebook and ExxonMobil, that's blatant manipulation. That's just like, we've had forever with the bond market where, we print out some currency and buy London bonds, and then they print out some currency and they buy the U.S. Treasury. So I think the whole thing is manipulated. So that's why, again, I really, recommend people do real diversification. You have to have maybe some stocks, but you also want some gold and some real estate and, some more physical things in your life, as much as you can.
So you just mentioned gold and silver, the precious metals market, and we haven't really seen the precious metals market move at all. I mean, it's been pretty much steady. Why do you think that it's been so steady where it hasn't really broken out like it did right after 2008? Why hasn't it really moved anywhere?
Ultimately volume moves assets, and the volume is just not there. The demand is just not strong enough, and it's been allocated in the stock market. Gold and silver have been beaten down by many third-party manipulators like central banks, like the bullion banks. It's a tiny market, but it's lucrative and liquid enough for them to make billions, but tiny enough for them to play around with the metals and not have any problems. So they're not manipulating an individual stock, or they're not getting into like a penny stock market where it's really low volume. They're in a market that's got billions of liquidity, gold and silver, but it's so tiny relative to other assets that it's not going. They're not going to get themselves in trouble by manipulating it, but it's very profitable. Another problem that gold has, I would say, what's happened since the election is, I truly believe this, and I've talked to Doug Casey and others about this, that for sure, when it comes to the U.S. retail demand, the same people who were doomsday preppers and buying gold and silver during the Obama years have completely gone optimistic since the election of President Trump. They're buying. I'm telling you, I'm talking to a lot of people, and I've observed this in many different conferences, just talking to the different people who have been going all around the country and speaking at different conferences, like Frank Holmes. The optimism from the gold bugs is to the point to where they're not buying gold. They're buying the Dow Jones. They're buying the Vanguard 500 tied to the S&P. And so I think that's like the retail demand. So when I speak to like precious metal bullion dealers, the guys who sell the physical gold and silver, what they're telling me is that they've never seen it more anemic. It's worse than ever. It's worse than the late 1990s. That's how bad it is. And it doesn't make sense, right? Because the fundamentals are there. The price is actually up decently since December of 2015. It was $1,041 then. It's about $1,200 now. That's not bad in the last 3 years. However, the demand is just not there to push these metals up. And until that happens, as long as money is diverted into the paper markets by large institutions, I don't think we're going to see a rally in gold and silver. I think gold and silver are going to have a rough year or two here.
Now, do you also think this has to do with the cryptocurrency market? I know, like Future Money Trends, you guys reported on this, and you covered Bitcoin when it was like $13 per coin. And, ever since then, it's gone up. Do you think people are looking at the cryptocurrency market like Bitcoin and things like that, and they were taking their money and putting it into Bitcoin? And now, of course, Bitcoin has been dropping, not as far as gold or silver. But do you think that's maybe one of the reasons?
I do, but I think it really affects the mining shares more and the other micro cap penny stocks. So, Future Money Trends, we're big believers in cryptocurrencies. And, I would love for everybody to check out our latest report at futuremoneytrends.com/block. I think you'll find it insightful. I'm a big believer in the cryptocurrencies, but I think where the cryptocurrency market hurt was, first of all the millennials and Gen Xers, they don't have stock brokerage accounts. They have Coinbase and cryptocurrency accounts. So there's a good chunk of the demographics that aren't buying stocks. They're not speculating in some of the smaller stocks. And, 90% of what we cover at Future Money Trends is related to cash flow and hard assets. But the other 10% is partnered up with these people like Keith Neumeyer and Amir Adnani and Anthony Lacavera, where we're partnering with startups trying to kind of leapfrog the net worth. So in that world of micro caps, these are companies less than 100 million, less than $500 million. That money, that liquidity has been completely sucked out of the market for many reasons. But cryptocurrencies is a huge one. All the speculative money went to the cryptocurrency market. And then to add insult to injury, the commodity stocks have just sucked in general. So add that to where you're not getting institutional demand, and now you're not even getting retail demand because everybody's jumped ship to the cryptos.
With the crypto market, with Bitcoin in particular, I mean, we've seen it, go up quite a bit and then it came down. Do you think the crypto market is being manipulated like the precious metals market?
Absolutely. During the biggest boom of the crypto market, when it went from, $600, $800 all the way to 20,000, 95% of the Bitcoins were actually owned by less than 1%. So that technically, or that can easily be manipulated. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was shocked that it didn't go a lot higher. Because when you look at Bitcoin like a stock and say, okay, well, there's 16 million outstanding or 17 million outstanding, and probably a few million of them are lost and just gone. And then you got a bunch of people who are never going to sell. Okay, so we've got 2 or 3 million in what's called the float. What's available to buy? And, let's be real. If you've got the whole world chasing something and there's only about 3 million of them to buy, I thought that in 2017 we would see a run to 50 to 100,000 on the price. Didn't make it that high, made it to about 20,000. So I do believe it's easily manipulated. And there's a lot of dark forces involved in, and I'm not talking about what people say like drug dealers. I'm talking like CIA. There are a lot of dark forces involved that, are against Bitcoin and are fighting Bitcoin, like the banks. So I have no doubt that it's manipulated. Everything's manipulated from the media we consume, to the assets we buy. There is nothing untouched at this point by central planners and governments.
You mentioned the CIA and the intelligence agency and the banks. Why do you think they needed to manipulate Bitcoin? What was such a big threat?
I think the threat in Bitcoin is that people can do transactions between themselves, and they can do large transactions or take cash across borders or transfer cash across borders, and the banking system won't even know about it. The CIA and the different national security agencies won't even know about it. So I think that probably alarms them greatly on that front. But for the banks, they collect trillions of dollars of fees, and it is literally, they are in the business of being the middleman. And what Bitcoin does is it takes away that role. And without that role, what role do the banks have? So I think it's very threatening. You've seen JP Morgan call it a bubble, call it a scam, yet they're trying to build their own cryptocurrency. They're trying to patent JP Morgan DigiCash. So, I mean, look, there's a lot of things that Bitcoin disrupts. It helps a lot of things. It improves, how we keep track of the blockchain, helps keep track of how we'll do transactions in the future, how we keep track of, from your home title to your auto insurance to, perhaps having a smart contract when you go to the doctor, and instead of filling out all that crap every time, you just pop open your smart contract and share it with the hospital. So the blockchain is going to help implement a safer and more trustworthy transactions for all of humanity. And the idea behind Bitcoin is that we can do peer-to-peer transactions without government interference or knowledge. And, a lot of people say that's bad, but that's the whole point, because you don't want, the government doesn't have the right to know everything you're doing. They don't have the right to stop you from transacting with other human beings. So when, I hear Bitcoin enthusiasts talk about how great it is that we're going to bring in the regulators, and now the CFTC has legitimized us, and we're going to get an ETF. I'm horrified when I hear that kind of stuff. I don't want to have Bitcoin so I can now jump back in time and pretend I'm back in the fiat money world where the central planners run everything and keep track of everything. And, I have no national sovereignty. I want what Bitcoin truly offered. And that was having some national sovereignty, being able to have my own unit of account and be able to transact with other people. And it's not Bank of America's business. I'll give you guys a perfect example. Future Money Trends has advertisers. And one of our advertisers, a few of them, are cannabis companies. And you'll see the banners on our site if you go to the site. Well, when we received a payment from one of them, Bank of America saw it, that it came from a cannabis company. And I've been a Bank of America customer for 25 years. They send a letter and says, we're closing your account in 30 days. You have 3 weeks to take care of all your business. At the end of 3 weeks, we will no longer clear your checks. And that was it. No appeal. It was like, getting ripped from Google or YouTube. Like nothing. Just, you're making money from cannabis and you're done. So the point is that's the control they have over me. That's the control they have over you. And I don't like that. And that's why I think the cryptocurrency market is needed, and it only makes me embrace the cryptocurrencies and gold more, because, at the snap of a finger, I mean, shoot, what if I would have been traveling? What if I would have been on a cruise with my kids? I'm not receiving mail, when I'm out and about exploring the world with my family. And just like that, Bank of America shut me down. Luckily, I was home and I saw it. But I mean, I don't like somebody having that kind of power. But so we don't think about that, because for the most part, they're not going to do that to you. But just so everybody knows, at any time they can inspect and close your safe deposit box. They can close your account. They do whatever they want.
I wanted to get your take on Trump's policies, tariffs, and what we've been seeing. They've given us a GDP number of 4% or so. I mean, where do you see the economy going? Is Trump's policies, are they working, or what's happening here?
I think Trump's policies and his enthusiasm and his supporters is certainly helping. Look, Trump's in a mess, and keep in mind that though the economy is doing better, they're borrowing $1 trillion in a year. That's a lot of money to pretend like you've got a booming economy. Let's ask ourselves, what would the economy look like if we only borrowed $500 billion? Or what would the economy look like if we borrowed nothing? It would be an absolute fiasco. So we're on an unsustainable path. Certainly, I believe taxation is theft. So when he went from 35 to 22, I was upset that it didn't go from 35 to 0. So I think anytime you give people more of their money that they're entitled to, it's good, because obviously people, individuals or corporations even, they're going to spend money on more sustainable things. Once the government has it, God forbid it goes into a bomb that's going to take all this natural resources, the finite oil, the finite copper, all these things, and then just blow it to shit in a fire in the Middle East. So, the government will misallocate the money. So of course, starve the beast, give more money back to the people, give it to Silicon Valley. Whether you think good about them or bad of them, I mean, there's certainly some good things coming out with new technologies and new businesses. So, overall, I think Trump has been a great disruptor and an agent of change. I honestly am surprised he has the stamina, because the man has taken more arrows than probably any human being on earth, and he has overcome absolute fake news that he has to deal with on a regular basis. I read something this morning that said Trump finally admits to collusion. And I read the article on Yahoo, and basically Trump was saying that they went, or his son went to that meeting with a Russian attorney thinking he was going to get some dirt on Hillary, which was already public information. And instead they talked about some adoption thing. Well, this has been common knowledge for like 6 months now. Trump tweets it and they act like it's breaking news, like they went to collude with the Russian. I mean, it's just, there's absolute stories being made up. And so, despite all of that, I think Trump has done some good. But my concern for him is that he could potentially be the ultimate fall guy. The economy is overdue, and it's very fragile. So we'll see what happens here. If maybe he'll prove us wrong, and that's one thing. Like you got to give entrepreneurs and people like Trump. Look, he's proved us all wrong at least a few times, and he continues to do quite well.
Where do you see the economy going, like in the next year or so?
I think over the next year, we'll probably see the Dow Jones cross 30,000. In my opinion, I think gold is probably headed to 1,000. I'm a buyer of gold here because the downside is so limited. The upside is tremendous. Could go to 5,000, 10,000, but the downside is like 15, 20%. So I love buying gold right now. The stock market, I think we should diversify a little bit into it. And as far as the economy as a whole, I think it will continue to do quite well in the perception of it doing quite well, just because the debt will continue. As long as sovereigns, other sovereigns, or the market doesn't reject all this mass consumption with debt, it will continue to we'll continue to live in this great illusion that allows us to live our great American lives. So it will continue. I don't see it ending in the next year, so I would say the economy will continue doing what it's been doing. But at some point in time, as we all know, that